This morning now we come to a very significant turning point in the whole sequence of accounts whereby Jesus is on the road to Jerusalem. So, as we saw last week, we're getting a feel for the accounts as Luke organizes them, as Jesus has resolutely set his face towards Jerusalem. That setting his face towards Jerusalem is full of destiny that he must bring to completion. And all along the road, we find accounts of a call and the nature of what he's calling people into, the kingdom that will reach its fulfillment in Jerusalem. So some scholars call this the Jerusalem document, this center portion to Luke's account that Luke maybe made use of in writing his whole document. So this morning we're going to focus on this story here and this story right here. I'm going to put them both together because they have similar theme, as we'll see. Now, previous to the setting his face towards Jerusalem, just to refresh our hearts and minds, was the Galilean ministry, and this is the sequence of accounts. Again, there's often three little things put together in a sequence, and there's just in terms of the poetical structuring and ordering of these accounts, it focuses on the opening and the center accounts and the conclusion. And again, the big theme is that the disclosure of Jesus' identity from the prophets, Isaiah 61 in particular here in the synagogue of Nazareth, has to do with an exodus from Babylon, a new exodus for the people of God. It has to do with the fulfillment of what that exodus is going to mean for the people of God. And its destiny is like the destiny of Elijah and Elisha, who were both not welcomed by their own, but welcomed by Gentiles. And so you had the prophet Elijah and Elisha. These are two main prophets, and the significance of them are their calling was like the destiny of Jesus' calling. It's going to be rejected by Israel, welcomed by Gentiles. Okay, we saw that in the opening accounts. We see that in the accounts here in the center. We saw this down here where the question of Jesus' identity, and he's one, he's not John, he's not Elijah, he's not the prophet, he's someone even greater, and it's the one that Moses talked about, the one that Elijah would make way for, and he's disclosed on the mountain as God's son, and he comes off the mountain, and the final thing is his destiny has to do with greatness, and that greatness has to do with servanthood, and it's going to be costly. Okay, so that was the great disclosure in the Galilean ministry. Now, these are those accounts on the road to Jerusalem. Last week we looked at just one, the kingdom prayer. But notice the theme. There's a call, it opens with resolutely setting towards Jerusalem, and it's interesting that the Samaritans, knowing that he's going towards Jerusalem, will not welcome him. And so the disciples say, Jesus, should we call down fire from heaven? And Jesus rebukes them. He doesn't even tell you what he says, but he rebuked them. It's sort of a subtle disclosure that yes, he's not going to be welcomed, but the consequences are not going to be judgment that comes from man, this one is going to take the judgment of not being welcomed. Okay. So you have then a call to mission on the road. You have the question how to inherit eternal life on the road. You have the kingdom prayer, and the kingdom prayer that we talked about last week. The kingdom's what to say, welcoming the kingdom, as we talked about last week. And then you've got signs of the kingdom. You've got kingdom conflict that's coming. The kingdom is now, but not yet. The call of the kingdom, and the focus is on Israel, a description of the nature of the kingdom, and then you come to a very significant turning point in the whole sequence of accounts. Everything that follows is going to be in parallel with this. So you can see the design in this whole document. There's something here of the call of the kingdom to Israel. Down here, there's the call not only just to Israel, but to Gentiles as well. And the purpose in all of this has to do with the destiny of a prophet like no other prophet. Okay. So we come now to this center story right here. And it begins in chapter 13. So if you got your Bibles, you might want to look at this, chapter 13, beginning with verse 22. It says, and this is the center to the whole journey, it says, Jesus traveled through cities and villages, teaching and making his way to Jerusalem. As he's making his way, someone asks him a question, and this is the key question that opens the revelation that's going to follow. The question is, Lord, will only a few be saved? Will only a few be saved? And it's very intriguing what Jesus' answer is to that question. He goes on to say, make every effort to enter through the narrow door. Many, I tell you, will try to enter and won't be able to. Once the owner of the house gets up and shuts the door, then you will stand outside and knock on the door, saying, Lord, open the door for us. And he's going to reply, I don't know you. So what is key in all of that? Make every effort. Another word that some translators use is strive to enter. It's a strong word. Make every single effort to enter because of the significance of what this means. To enter the door of the house. So you're beginning to get a picture of a house. That door is a very narrow door. So you got a picture here of a very narrow door to a house. Make every effort to get into that house, because many are going to try and they won't be able to, because the owner of the house, who's the owner of this house? Huh? The master of the house is God himself. This house is going to be synonymous with the kingdom. Entering the house, the heavens and the earth where God rules. This is his house. Enter in through the narrow door. Make every effort to enter through that narrow, because the master is going to get up one day and he's going to close the door to the house. Then there are going to be people who are standing outside Lord, open the door for us. Open the door for us. And he will reply, I don't know you or where you are from. Now, in classic Middle Eastern culture, you don't invite somebody into your house if they're a stranger. You do not invite strangers into your house. So here Jesus is saying, I don't know you. You're a stranger to me. I will not invite you in. Then you will begin to say to me, well, we ate and drank with you in your presence. You taught in our streets. And he will respond, I don't know you or where you are from. Go away from me, all you evildoers. Then there will be weeping and grinding of teeth when you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob inside this house. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets in God's kingdom. Therefore, the house is the kingdom. And you yourselves thrown out. You stand on the outside. You didn't enter in. Why didn't you enter in? You were not known. Okay. So it's a picture of a great ingathering that has an enigma that surrounds it. He goes on to say, people are going to come from east, from west, from north, from east, and from the south, and sit down to eat. It's a picture again of a table inside of a house, and great feast, celebration. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are there, but you outside. Then, verse 30, it says, behold. Here's this word we've been focusing on this last week in our prayer. Behold. Behold has to do with intensely look at this. Take hold of this. This is future description of destiny. The first will be last. The last will be first. Now, what does that mean in terms of the whole picture? Who were the first? It was Israel. She was the first chosen. And the enigma that surrounds this whole question of who's going to be saved is that those that were first stand outside, gnashing their teeth, and those coming from east and west, north and south, that's very symbolic of the nations of the earth, Gentiles in particular, have entered in, and they're sitting down at table and feasting with the master of the banquet. But Israel stands outside. Now, if you're listening to Jesus' description of this, who's going to be saved? Are only a few going to be saved? He's saying, take note of this. Behold this. Then it says, and this gets at the center to the answer that Jesus gives. And notice, this is destiny encapsulated inside this envelope of the picture of this house. So the destiny, it says at that time, some Pharisees approached Jesus and said, go, get away from me here, because Herod wants to kill you. So here you have the threat of death from Herod that the Pharisees bring, and say, Jesus, don't continue on to Jerusalem in light of this threat? Notice Jesus' response. Behold, again, it's the word in verse 32. I'm throwing out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day, I will complete my work. Oh, it's very intriguing. Behold, and then you got the signs of the kingdom that will be displayed, that have been displayed on the road all this way. Behold, the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame are raised up. He's throwing out demons. He's healing people. All of that is signs of the kingdom that it's present and it's coming. Okay? And today, and it will continue today, tomorrow, and on the third day, he will complete his work. This is prophetic. Behold, take hold of this. Okay? Anyway, however, it's necessary for me. And now the text begins to repeat itself. This is the turning point. This is the ultimate turning point on the whole road to Jerusalem, the sequence of accounts. At this point it turns and it says, however, I must keep going. There is that resolute determination to complete his work, and it means Jerusalem. I must keep going, even in the threat of death. Today, tomorrow, and the next day. Notice the repetition here, the parallelism. See, this is the turning point. For surely, and now you have the parallel death theme that is highlighted. No prophet can die outside Jerusalem. Now, what does that mean? No prophet can die outside Jerusalem. Well, in the context, we have to interpret its meaning. The destiny of this prophet, Jesus, like Elijah and Elisha, will only find its completion in Jerusalem. Because he's coming to his house to restore it. His house is in Jerusalem. He must die in Jerusalem. All the prophets that disclose this Messiah who's coming talk about Jerusalem. Jerusalem. So to complete his prophetic work, he must die in Jerusalem, where prophets are killed. Prophet after prophet sent, and they reject and kill him. Jerusalem. That's his destiny. He's taken up the cross, death. He must go. Okay. And then the next part is in parallel to the failed ingathering here, this picture that was talked about. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long, you who kill the prophets, stone those who are sent to you. How often I've wanted to gather your people, just as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you didn't want that. You rejected it. A mother hen gathering her chicks under her wings. That's refuge. That's care. But you rejected it. So you got the note. The rejection theme is in parallel with you didn't enter in. Behold, and this is the third behold now in the whole account. Your house is going to be left to you desolate. I tell you then, you won't see me until the time comes when you say, Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Now that is a very significant little key word that he says, because it comes from Psalm 118. Psalm 118 talks about the capstone that is rejected becomes the foundation to the house. It's marvelous in our eyes. A day of salvation came, and we didn't recognize it. It came through the one that we threw out. It's prophetic. It's like a little key to draw from Psalm 118 what's going to happen, see? You won't see me again until you say these words. And the conclusion to Psalm 118 is great rejoicing, because that rejected one became the capstone to the house, and the righteous enter in, and it's got the whole idea of the righteous enter in through the gate to that house. I'm sure Jesus was pondering Psalm 118 when he said these words. He wants you to look back and think about the context of these words and all that surrounds them. It's this looking back and listening to what's behind the stage on the wall. It's Psalm 118. And he's coming to his house. He's going to enter in through that narrow, costly door, and he's going to restore the whole house. We can enter in and become righteous in his sight. Yeah. But those that are trying to protect that house, this is ultimately the Pharisees, the religious leaders, as Jesus will come to Jerusalem, and they will begin to question what he does inside this house. They're trying to protect their own house. The destiny of that activity is going to be a desolate house, empty, abandoned. See? No life in the house. It's a wilderness in this house. And it was because you tried to protect it on your own terms. So, what an amazing. This is a prophetic word or a vision. And it answers this question, Lord, are only a few people going to be saved? So what do you feel in your heart? Make every effort to enter in, even though it's costly. Because he's going to go ahead of us, and he's going to make way, and he's going to complete his work, and we benefit from his work. Okay, now, let's go on to this next story now. He talks about a sequence of accounts of 3 little accounts, and that's next. It has to do with banquet, it has to do with table, it has to do with costliness, and so forth. And then you come to Luke chapter 15. This is the next one on the road. This is now the sequence of accounts after that picture of that house, and they're in parallel with previous accounts. And you get to this one, beginning in chapter 15, and you've got this picture. And there's 3 parts to what he does now in this section of accounts. The first one is a picture of all the tax collectors. Here, tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling. So here you have a picture of Pharisees and legal experts, and they're grumbling. Their grumbling is this: this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. So you picture sinners, tax collectors, sitting around table with Jesus. This is the ultimate picture of fellowship in the culture of those days. Sitting down at table, eating together. So there is Jesus in the midst of tax collectors and sinners. Outside, grumbling Pharisees and experts. This man welcomes, there's that great theme. He welcomes these to sit at table with him. So then it says, in response to this, Jesus tells a parable. And the parable has 3 parts. The parable discloses Jesus' answer to their grumbling. You know, story and parable can get under your skin and expose in ways that open confrontation can never do. And this was Jesus' style. He'd just tell a story. And you'd see yourself in the story. And then you would hear what Jesus is saying, if you have ears to hear. You will see what he's disclosing if you have eyes that perceive. You can hear the story and not understand. You can see what's being pictured, but never perceive. So the parable divided people. Those who had faith could see. Those who did not would hear and walk away. So, perceive, understand what Jesus says now in this parable. The context to the parable is a typical Middle Eastern village. Houses are very, very close. The streets are so narrow, you can look outside your bedroom window and you can hear your neighbor talking in the house across the street. Everybody's wealth in this village is in their fields. Everybody, their inheritance is their land. What goes on in a Middle Eastern village like this, everybody knows. Because the community is so tight. We've had a little taste of this in villages of India. And everybody in the village knows everybody and knows everything that is happening. It says there's a man, and if you take the parable now and you divide it, there's 3 parts to the parable. The first one is all about a man and sheep. The second one is about a woman and coins. And the third is a father and 2 sons. The first one, it says, Jesus told them this parable, suppose someone among you had 100 sheep and you lost one. Now, they're very familiar with sheep. Suppose you have 100 and you lose one. Won't you leave the 99 in the pasture and search for the lost one until you find it? And then it's like it begins to reverse itself. When you find it, you're going to be absolutely thrilled. And you'll place it on your shoulders, and then you will go home and you will call together your friends and neighbors, and you will say, celebrate with me because I found my lost sheep. I found it. Notice the parallelism here. You lost and you found it. You leave the 99 and search intently. The search results in a calling together and great celebration, all because you found it. That's the center of the little sequence, the little parable. Now he says, in the same way, I tell you, there'll be more joy in heaven over one sinner who changes both heart and life than over 99 righteous people who have no need to change their hearts and lives. In the same way, I tell you, there'll be more joy in heaven. Now let me ask you in this. Do the sheep repent? No, sheep don't repent, do they? What's the emphasis in this statement? In the same way, there's more joy in heaven over somebody who repents. So the connection with what's been said has to do with the joy, the celebration. And like a sheep is lost and found, so when a sinner repents and is found, heaven rejoices. Heaven rejoices. Now listen carefully. Jesus has listening to the Pharisees grumbling that he sits at table and he eats with them. Okay? Then he goes on. He says, about a woman now. Or, now it begins, he's making intentional connection between the first one about the sheep and this one because it's all one parable. They're all saying the same thing. Okay? Or what woman, if she owns, now there's that emphasis. You start thinking, the first one is about a man and sheep out in pasture. Now it's a picture of a woman inside of a house and treasure. What does this make you think of? Keep thinking. The woman, if she owns 10 silver coins and she loses one, won't she light a lamp and sweep the house, searching intently the whole house until she finds it? So again, searching for the lost coin. She'll light a lamp. She'll sweep the house, searching until she finds. Then it begins to repeat itself. When she finds it, what does she do? She calls together her neighbors and friends and says, celebrate with me. Why? I found the lost coin. In the same way, joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who repents. In the same way. So it has to do with Joy breaks out in heaven, just like it broke out in that woman when she found that lost coin. Now think about the symbolism in these two. Sheep, shepherd. Woman, treasure. What does this make you think of in the biblical story? Keep thinking. We come to the third one. Now, Jesus said, there was a certain man. He had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. Now, in terms of that village and that cultural context, what is the son asking for in terms of inheritance? Well, that's along with this. He's asking for something that only happens when your father has died. The inheritance is their field that's mine. And he's asking this with his father still living. Now, if you went to a Muslim person, I did this one time through one of my students, had him tell me, what do those Muslim people think when they hear this story in that village? And he went out to that village and he told this story and he brought back what they thought. And they thought this was a very, very shameful thing for this son to do in relationship to his father. It's similar in Muslim culture as it was in Jewish culture. A very shameful thing. The youngest son is shaming his father by asking for this before he's even died. The father, in response to the shame that has come to him by his own son, it says the father divided then his estate between his 2 sons. The estate is his land. Wealth is in the land. So the father, most fathers would have cut that son off from his inheritance because of the shameful request that he's making. But this father is very, very different. He divided the inheritance and he gave. It says then that younger son then, notice, that then the father divided his estate. Soon after, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. Now, that phrase, he quickly gathered everything together, that means he what? Sold his land, got the money from the sale. Now imagine what the whole village thinks when this happens. Everybody knows what's happening with this rebellious son. And he takes the money and he goes off to a far land. And it says, there he wasted his wealth through, and then you've got to translate, some extravagant living, some living without any bounds. It's just loose living. It's basically it's saying all the father's inheritance given to this son lost in a foreign land. Notice the parallel. A lost coin, lost sheep, an inheritance lost a far country. When he had used up then all of his resources, a famine came across the land, and he began to be in need. So what did he do? He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. Now he's hiring himself out to what? Save himself in the midst of famine, because he's lost all that he had. And the owner, the one who he hired himself out to, sent him to feed pigs. So you know this man is a Gentile. And for a Jewish boy, having lost all of his father's inheritance, that was just a huge shame on the whole family. And now hires himself out, and that person sends him to go feed pigs. And he's such in desperate condition, he even wants to eat the pig's food, but he can't even get the pig's food to eat. That is ultimate lostness. And nothing is saving him. It seems like every step he makes, he gets into further and further difficulty. He's trying to save himself. And it just leads to even further lostness. Then it says, now this is the center part to the story, and it begins to have parallel between it, just like these. Now it says, when he came to his senses. This is used in one other place in the scriptures. It was when Peter was imprisoned, and the angel came and woke him up and then led him out of prison. And it says at that point he came to his senses. In other words, he really recognized this was happening to him. It says, when he came to his senses then, in this sense, okay, he has an idea now of what he should do, and he said to himself, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food? But I'm starving to death. So he's thinking about home. He knows that the servants in his own home have food. So he says to himself, here I am, starving to death. I will get up and I will go to my father and I will say these words. And there's a very specific thing that he's going to say. He's going to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Make me one of your hired servants. Then I will have food. So he has this idea. Now, he heads back towards home. It says, While he was still a long way off, and envision now a path outside the village, and a long way, distant way, the son comes walking down that path. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him. He was moved with compassion. What does this tell you about this father? He was watching. He had a heart full of compassion for a son that had shamed him greatly. He's a very unusual father, isn't he? And it says, his father got up and ran to him, hugged him, kissed him. A Middle Eastern father to get up and run like this was very shameful, because they would pick up their robes to run, and that was exposing shame. And he, though, because his heart is so full of compassion, he despises the shame because of the love he has for his son. Runs to him, hugs him, kisses him, and then notice the parallel now to what has happened. The son has said, I will say to my father, I've sinned, I no longer deserve to be your son, make me a hired servant. So out of the son's words now come these words, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. The father at that point quickly said to his servants, bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Now what did the son not say? Make me a hired servant. Why didn't he say that? He's probably so overwhelmed with his father's embrace. All he can say is, Father, I've sinned against heaven and earth. I no longer deserve to be your son. The father says, quick, bring my robe. The robe that he would bring would be his own robe. The best robe in the house was the father's robe. Putting a ring on his finger was a symbol of reinstating him into the family. And putting sandals on his feet, only servants would never wear sandals. It's only members of the household. And the father is welcoming him back home. And then he says to the servants, go, kill the fattened calf, bring these things, kill the fattened calf. We must celebrate, for my son was lost and is now found. Notice the parallel between the parts to the parable. We must celebrate the fattened calf. A fattened calf in a Middle Eastern thing would only be killed on very, very special occasions. It would not be just any ordinary celebration or meal. It would be something on the level of a wedding in which a fattened calf would be killed. And now the father is calling for the fattened calf to be killed. We must celebrate because my son was lost and now is found. And then you come to the end, and the last part to the story is, now the older son was out in the field, that son came in from the field, and the closer he got to the village, he heard the celebration. So he actually sent a servant to tell him what the celebration was all about. And the servant said to him, "Your brother has arrived. Your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he welcomed his son back safe and sound." And then the older son is absolutely furious. He didn't want to come in. He didn't want to come in. And it says, his father got up, came out. Now this is the third very embarrassing thing in that culture. For in the midst of a celebration, hearing that your own oldest son will not come into the celebration, and for you to get up, embrace the shame, go out to your son and beg him to come in. There's the father's heart again. And he went out and he pleaded with his son, "Come on in." And his father answered, "Behold, I've served you all these years. I never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friend. But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up all your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." He's angry because of what? He's done all the right things in his house. He's followed his father's instructions. And yet his father seemingly never slaughtered a fattened calf for him, not even an ordinary goat, for him to celebrate with his friends. But the father says these words, "Son, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is now alive. He was lost and now he is found." And the parable ends. You don't know whether the son ever came in. But now, what is Jesus saying to the Pharisees who are grumbling? What is he saying? What's similar between each one of these accounts? Something is lost. A great search takes place. This one, though, the son tries to save himself. And then the turning point here, when something is found, it has to do with the father and the initiative of the father that overcame all that shame. And it was out of that the son was saved. He couldn't save himself. He'd lost all merit to be saved. Okay? And the father welcomed him back into the house, the home, the family. And the older son, who followed all the regulations, if he thinks he merits salvation, surely has a right. But Jesus says it's not on that basis at all. So like the Pharisees that stand outside grumbling, while Jesus sits at table with sinners and tax collectors, he's basically saying, do you hear the celebration? Come on in. I welcome you. I took the shame. I'll take the shame. Come on in. But do the righteous come who think they're righteous? No, they stand outside. So we don't know if the older son ever came in. But it's Jesus' call to the Pharisees, come on in. So there's Jesus' answer to the question why he sits at table with sinners and tax collectors. It tells us something of what is the cost involved in entering into the narrow door into this house. Can we receive the shame that he went through, the cost that he took and made to make way for us? Can we acknowledge, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am not worthy, and just allow that grace to come to us and embrace us, kiss us, robe us, ring us, put sandals on our feet. That's what entering through that door means, see? It's a very narrow door. People that are righteous, that think that they can merit entrance into this house, there's no way. You will stand outside. You will stand outside. Well, what is the symbolism here? A man out in the fields, sheep, and then a woman and coins. There's something about the man and the sheep that I think have to do with the great shepherd of the sheep, and all mankind were sheep of this great shepherd. The woman and the coins inside the house, it has to do with Israel. She was a treasured possession, but she was lost. And then you've got a Father who is both for Gentile and for Jew. Both for that goes off to a Gentile and squanders an inheritance, and a Jew inside the house who is righteous in their own eyes. He's still a Father calling you, come on in, come on in. What an amazing disclosure of who he is. And it's turned. It's not only a call to Israel, it's a call now to Israel and Gentile as he makes his way to Jerusalem. Okay, so we'll stop with that, huh? And next time we will see him come into Jerusalem, and he will enter into his house.